On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
That was U.S. President Donald Trump speaking to American reporters in Washington on the morning of June 24th, that's 3 weeks ago, about a ceasefire between Israel and Iran that was supposed to come into effect. Trump's military had just bombed 3 of Iran's major nuclear development sites, and then the U.S. president pushed for a truce. But Trump was exasperated and even used the F word, which some media outlets bleeped out, because despite the agreement to stand down as of that morning, Israel and Iran both launched a couple of final rounds of strikes against each other. You'll recall one was a direct hit on a Beersheba apartment that killed 4 Israelis. But the 12-day-long hostilities stopped, and the ceasefire has held since then, while Trump and others try to work out a nuclear disarmament deal. And in the meantime, Middle East observers have been asking a lot of questions about the impact of Israel's so-called Operation Rising Lion, which began June 13th. Like how effective the raids were on the nuclear capabilities. Did they damage the reactors and stop Iran from completing nuclear bomb capabilities? Or was it just delivering enough damage for a few months setback? Also, although several high-ranking Iranian government and military officials were killed, both Trump and Israel's prime minister walked back the idea of killing Iran's supreme leader and president and forcing a regime change. And is Iran now so humiliated on the international stage and at home that it'll start firing missiles again and take out its wrath by attacking Jews around the world? Here in Canada, Iranian Canadians who oppose the Islamic regime's 46-year hold on their country had rejoiced, at least at first, when the IDF launched its raids. Hope mixed with sadness, though, while at least 600 to 900 Iranians died and thousands more were wounded. But now it appears the Ayatollah was not killed, and reports are coming in of a domestic crackdown and repression on people who Iran calls collaborators with the Zionists.
It is a common trait of dictatorships like this, and I really genuinely worry. And I'm not the only one. I mean, a lot of Iranians, especially former political prisoners and so on, are saying this openly now.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, July 16th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. When Israel launched Operation Rising Lion against Iran, Toronto lawyer and human rights activist Kaveh Shahrooz was unable to reach his family and friends back in Iran because his former country had blocked its citizens from accessing the internet. Shahrooz was born in Iran. He came to North America when he was a boy, completed degrees from the U of T and also from Harvard. He's worked for Global Affairs Canada as a policy advisor. He teaches international law and human rights at U of T, and he's been a prominent critic of Iran and a vocal ally of the Canadian Jewish community and Israel. He recently spoke at a town hall at the Toronto Jewish Community Centre's Prosserman campus. And last year, he sounded the alarm about Iranian foreign influence in Canadian politics, because in 2024, he ran to be nominated as the Conservative Party of Canada's candidate in Richmond Hill, Ontario, but withdrew from the race after he said there was an online smear campaign orchestrated by the Iranian Islamic government and its supporters linking him to terrorism. Shahrooz was closely monitoring the 12-day-long Iran-Israel war and its aftermath. He sat down with my CJN colleague Alex Rose just as the ceasefire went into effect to share his deep disappointment that the Iranian regime remains in place and to share his fears of what they will do now they've been, as he calls it, deeply humiliated. Here's that conversation.
Hi there, this is Alex Rose. I'm the summer reporter with the Canadian Jewish News, and I'm here with Kaveh Shahruz. Starting with your background, I guess from human rights, what are your thoughts as you see everything going on?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I mourn, any innocent life lost in these bombings, both on the Iranian side and the Israeli side. But I also have to balance that by saying that the Israeli attack on Iran has really been incredibly precise. I mean, the numbers of civilians, I've heard different numbers, but I think 400 is the last sort of credible number that I heard. And that's, very tragic. But at the same time, when you balance that against the incredibly high value targets that Israel managed to take out in terms of just IRGC officials, security officials, and the sites that it managed to hit, the nuclear sites, the military sites, and then the American bombing of the nuclear facilities. It's actually remarkable that they managed to hit all those targets with so few casualties.
And so last you heard, is it confirmed that the American strikes destroyed the nuclear capabilities, or where's that at? Do you know?
I don't think I've seen credible reporting on that. Obviously, the Americans have taken the line that they have been destroyed. Iran is claiming they haven't. Frankly, I value the American position and reporting more so than the Iranian one. But I think it's going to take some time for intelligence agencies to be able to kind of assess what happened, really.
Mm-hmm. And when this strike from Israel first started, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, some degree of fear and worry, which I think is natural. A lot of my family, other than my immediate family, they're all back in Iran and Tehran, where a lot of the bombs were falling. But aside from that, I mean, I think, I think these bombings and this attack was long overdue. It was incredible anger and rage that I felt, and frankly, I don't think I was the only one. I think a great many Iranians, both in the diaspora and inside the country, felt this way. This was a completely unnecessary war. This was completely a war of choice by the Iranian regime for having developed this utterly unnecessary nuclear weapons program, and for having meddled for 4 decades in the affairs of the Israelis. There's no reason, there's no national interest that's affected by Israel and Palestinians and their fight. And yet somehow Iran's regime has made itself central to that battle. And so this war was completely unnecessary. And I was incredibly angry at the regime for having caused this for Iran's people. And not only did it cause it, but it also didn't provide any sort of defense for its own people. You look at Israel and they have amazing bomb shelters, and they have taken great pains to protect their citizens. And Iran has done none of those things. All the money has gone into developing this nuclear program. All the money has gone into building tunnels under Gaza, and almost nothing spent on protecting civilians.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess something people have been debating is if the strike was warranted, justified, or even legal, and if it was preemptive. But I think part of what you're saying is Hamas as a proxy of Iran, it counts as an Iranian attack, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this was a very clear case of preemption. You've got a regime that for 4 decades has been saying, we're going to wipe you off the map. It has been financing Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, other groups that have been causing chaos in the region. And then on October 7th, it effectively, through its proxy arm, carried out this horrendous attack on Israel, and looks like it's rushing towards a bomb. So, any credible policymaker anywhere in the world, if they were in that situation, I think they would decide to take action because they just need to protect their own citizens.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of the interplay with the possibility of regime change here? How do you think about that with Israel being involved militarily, and does that maybe take some agency away from the Iranian people, or is it the kind of disruption that's needed for them to have a chance to overthrow the regime? Or maybe it's more complicated?
Yeah, look, I mean, my commitment for many years has been to a change in regime. And my ideal scenario would be one in which the Iranian people themselves rise up and they manage to overthrow this regime and they decide who their future leader is going to be. And it's not like they haven't tried, right? As late as 2 years ago, we saw a massive uprising in Iran, the Woman Life Freedom Movement. But it was brutally repressed. And so if it has to be achieved this way, then so be it. Obviously, I worried about the expansion of this war to become more sort of Gaza style, where a lot of civilians are killed in the process. Thankfully, that did not come to that, at least this round. I mean, who knows how many further rounds of conflict there will be. But, I think the goal ultimately has to be regime change. I know that the Israelis and the Americans seem to have taken a step back from that at the moment, but it is virtually impossible to live with the Islamic regime in Iran for a safe international community and a safe Middle East. This is a regime that ultimately, at its very core, is dedicated to terror and anti-Semitism and all the things that make it just an abhorrent player on the international scene.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Yeah, you say the Israelis and Americans seem to have taken a step back. As we record this, Trump just announced a ceasefire. It may have been violated by both sides, or it was violated. We're not sure who violated it first. And at least as of the last 15 minutes, Trump is now saying that regime change in Iran is not what he wants because it would cause chaos. Of course, he's unpredictable. We don't know what he means. But were you hoping that they would keep pressing militarily until there was a crack in the foundation? Are you happy to see them draw back because of the potential for civilian loss? Or, again, it's still unstable at the moment?
Yeah. Look, I have to carry two conflicting thoughts. One is just this deep worry about innocent civilians being killed through this war, including my own family members. Obviously, I don't wish them ill. But at the same time, this really, in some ways, felt like the last best chance for overthrowing this regime that has just committed so much cruelty against its own people and against members of the international community. So I have to say that in that respect, I'm deeply, deeply disappointed, and I'm actually worried about what's to come, because totalitarian states like Iran's regime tend to lash out at their own populations when they're humiliated internationally. And Iran's regime has been grossly humiliated. I think it's been shown to be a complete paper tiger. It hasn't been able to do anything. And in the face of that humiliation, I have no doubt that they're going to blame a lot of their own citizens and carry out massacres, the likes of which we probably have not seen.
That's awful.
Yeah, I worry about that. I mean, we've got examples of this. Iran, after the Iran-Iraq War, again, another instance in which it was internationally humiliated for years and years. It had been talking about how it would, defeat Iraq's armies and so on. And ultimately, it was a stalemate, and they looked like they were about to lose, so they had to agree to end the war. And they carried out one of the worst massacres in contemporary Iranian history. The same thing happened with Saddam Hussein after the first Gulf War. You may recall in 1991, Saddam carried out, a massacre of Shiites and Kurds, whom it blamed for its international defeat.
Right. And what have you heard about how Iranians are behaving, like, on the ground? First of all, what's their access to information like? Do they realize how much Iran has been humiliated, or is Iran trying to spin it differently there? And are people starting to protest now, or is that still kind of trickling?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen any protests, but what your listeners and readers have to understand is that it's a very, very securitized state at the moment. The regime is openly saying that anyone found collaborating, and they define collaborating very, very loosely, collaborating with Israel will be executed, and on an expedited basis. So that's the atmosphere in which Iranian people are operating. And yeah, I mean, I think Iranians do actually have information. Now the regime tries to cut off access to information. It cut off the internet for a couple of days there, which was a very worrying couple of days, because a lot of people, including me, couldn't get access to their families to find out if everybody was okay. But the internet slowly seems to be coming back. Iranians are not cut off from the world. They, have access to BBC News and satellite television and so on. So they can see that the regime has been utterly defeated militarily. Now, the regime I've seen today online seems to be spinning this another way, saying, we forced the Israelis to accept a ceasefire, which is just a completely inverted telling of what actually happened. But I don't think very many Iranians are going to fall for that. And actually, one interesting thing to pay attention to in the coming days is how the regime's own base, the true believers, will react. I mean, they too, despite the trust that they've placed in the regime, I mean, they're not fools. They will look and see what happened, and they will get the news as well. And they will have a lot of tough questions, I think, for the regime.
Mm. And so where do you think things stand? Again, it's impossible to really predict, but maybe what are some likely outcomes from where things stand at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of outcomes. What I can say with some certainty is that the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic of today or next month, will be fundamentally different in some ways than the Islamic regime of last month. The supreme leader is now much diminished. There is reporting, including in the Atlantic and other places, where there are sort of internal plots by regime officials to try to sideline him. He's obviously proven himself unable to do very much in the last little while. It's not even entirely clear that he's alive. I mean, he's been hiding and no one really knows where he is or has access to him. So it's quite possible that some other power base in Iran, be it some other cleric or the IRGC, that they will step up and they will take control, and they may well, sign an agreement with the West and capitulate effectively, and then they will turn inward and repress their population. The other possible outcome, and one I'm hoping for, though it seems less likely now, is a popular uprising. People actually coming to the streets, seeing that the regime has been degraded in terms of its power, and they try to take over institutions and rebuild on whatever remains.
Right. What about Israel's place in all this? From what you're hearing, both in the Iranian diaspora and Iranians at home, are people grateful towards Israel, ambivalent, or maybe the fact that it was Israel dropping bombs on their country and countrymen means that even the ones who had some hope, a lot of them are kind of turning against Israel because, they're the one inflicting the violence, whatever the reason?
Yeah, look, I mean, Iran is a country of 90 million people, so there's a lot of different opinions. I would say, obviously, those that were supporters of the regime before this are now angrier at Israel than they used to be. Within the camp of people who oppose this regime, I think there's a split. A lot of people are very, very angry at the regime and not at all angry at Israel, and they're actually thankful in a lot of ways to Israel. But on the other side of that, there are people, I wouldn't say I see a lot of anger at Israel, but I do see some sentiment that like this war is unnecessary and civilians shouldn't be harmed, and there's just natural kind of knee-jerk anti-war sentiment. I see a little bit of that. Just the people that I've spoken with in Iran, I don't know if they're representative, they're my family, they're my friends, so there's some selection bias there, but I would say I've heard very little anger at Israel. A lot of the anger has been directed at Iran's own regime that caused this war effectively and didn't protect its own citizens.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something you said before about where Israeli money goes compared to Iranian money, that yes, they're engaging in offensives now, but that's because they know they can, for the most part, protect their citizens back at home. And you said a lot of people are very aware of that kind of contrast. And so do you think that sense of kind of just being left to be cannon fodder or missile fodder is maybe going to feed into the chance of a popular uprising, like really seeing it happen?
Yeah, I mean, look, with the exception of the true believers, I don't think very many people had high hopes for Iran's regime protecting them. I think for 4 decades, it has demonstrated that it doesn't actually care about its own citizens. But this was a really stark illustration of that, I think, to most people. And even the true believers, I think even in that camp, the smarter ones will look and say, look, you promised us a huge resistance and, fighting against the aggressors, this and that, but your proxies have now been decimated. You weren't able to even control the skies over Iran's airspace. So what are you talking about? What have you been doing actually with all this money and all this energy? Why have we been isolated from the international community for so long? So yeah, I mean, I think those questions are going to be asked, and I think that will be yet another thing that will anger people and motivate them to want to change this regime.
And what are your thoughts on the way that the United States has entered and, I guess, quickly exited the conflict?
I mean, it's hard to find any sort of strategy in anything Trump does, frankly. Had Trump taken a complete opposite approach and either gotten himself bogged down in an actual invasion, or had he not entered the war at all? I think all those things, you could find explanations in Trump's behavior and his statements, in his base. There's so many contradictory things he says, and there's so many people with contradictory views in his MAGA camp that it's really hard to know. I mean, I'm grateful that hopefully they took out Iran's nuclear facilities, the weapons facilities. But I obviously would have hoped that Trump's statement over the weekend about regime change would actually be his position, but he seems to have changed positions rather quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think what people need to keep in mind is that it's really hard to know anything at this stage. It's I was asked to write an op-ed yesterday about this, and I wrote something. And I submitted it around noon, and then at 2 p.m. I had to revise it because Iran was attacking U.S. bases in Qatar, and then by 6 p.m. I had to rewrite it because there was a ceasefire. This thing just changes by the minute, so frankly, anyone that makes grand predictions about the future is bound to be wrong.
Right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. To learn more about how Iranian Canadians are sharing a common enemy with Canada's Jewish community in Israel, go to the links in our show notes and read the stories. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. The executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.